we are talking about is Ifa witchcraft, looking at it from the perspective of what people call Juju, black magic, witchcraft, etc. All of these different things that people love to say Ifa is. We're going to talk about the truth of it and how do we navigate our way around all of these different dynamics. Greetings from Virginia. Greetings to everybody who is showing up. I appreciate you as always. Greetings, Asaju. Thank you for joining us, everyone. So, as always, guys, if you're watching us live, be sure to go ahead, put any comments that you have, any questions, concerns, or anything as we go along, and we'll try to address them through and through. If you're watching the replay, guys, feel free to go ahead and let me know what stood out to you. Let me know if you have any questions as well, and we will get to them on the back end. Greetings, Hidden Beauty, Alafia. So, yes, guys, I want to start with the pre-episode survey, which was about the biggest questions that you all have about this topic, right? And so nobody actually wanted to know where, Juju and Ifa are the same things, probably because most of you all already practice. Some of you all are probably new, and you hopefully you understand like what you're going into and what you want to do. And so you probably done a lot of that preliminary research. Does Ifa involve witchcraft or harmful practices? About 15% of you all wanted to know that. How is black magic different from African spirituality? That was the biggest question that we're definitely going to get to, because it is a question that we need to address. Unfortunately, we have to address it in today's world because people have linked them together. And about 31% of you all wanted to know, can witchcraft be used for protection, love, success, and those types of things? So we're going to answer all of that and more today. Again, welcome everybody who has already joined us so far. And let's just go ahead and jump into it. So I want to do a comparison of the Juju, witchcraft, black magic, and Ifa to give an overview first. Then I'll dive individually into each of the other practices as far as Juju, witchcraft, and black magic are concerned, and how they're linked to Ifa specifically. And then we'll go over some things that you can do to overcome these dynamics if they impact you in a negative way. So, from the perspective of Juju, witchcraft, black magic, right, these are often associated with manipulative type of practices, harm, ill intent, ill will, things like that. When you want to basically force something to happen, when you want to hurt somebody through these types of mechanisms, that's when people usually engage in what is in today's world is known as Juju, witchcraft, and black magic. And they come from different spaces, and we're going to talk about that as well. Ifa rituals, okay, this is a sacred practice that involves balance, healing, destiny alignment, that type of work. Ifa is not about manipulation or even forcing something to happen. Instead, it's about opening up the gateways or opening up any type of blockages so blessings can flow. The blessings that were already meant to be, though, is not making something happen that wasn't meant to happen in the first place. Okay. When we're looking at Juju, witchcraft, black magic, those types of things, these are enacted to force something to come through. It is not always in a harmful way, though. So it's not always that you're trying to hurt someone else in order to get what you want, but you want what you want, irrespective of whether it's for you or not. And so that's when people go and try to work with these types of devices to initiate a form of control. They're going to force things to happen. They're going to get the power that they want by any means necessary at this point. So that's why they would choose to work with forces outside of Ifa or other similar practices that are based on balance and harmony. So when we approach Ifa, we're approaching Ifa from a very, very ethical perspective. We're going to see what is meant for us first. right? And if it's not something that's meant for us, we don't go in and force our way into it. When you get into that space of saying, I want this, even though, Ifa or whatever other tradition you may be looking into says this is not aligned with your destiny, but you say, I want it anyway, right? And you're going to do whatever it takes, any type of manipulative spell work. And that can even so be inclusive of you even, speaking affirmations for something to come through, right? When you're forcing it to come through whatever way that you desire it to. It could be an actual, I won't even say actual spell, because really when you're speaking words, that is a form of a spell as well. But when you are going to go out and do what most people consider like ritual work, like animal sacrifices, giving offerings, and things like that, you're asking on IG, do I have I guess to have my hand of Ifa to have an Ide? No, you don't. You can get an Ide anytime that you want to. Now, the hand of Ifa does come with that. It would Ilekis for most people. It's the proper word you're saying is Ide, but most people know it as Ileki. You don't have to get the hand of Ifa, but the hand of Ifa should come with it. That's traditional practice. Greetings, alien black girl. So yes, and we'll get a little bit to that in a bit as well, as far as the Lakis and a little bit of discussion there. Greetings, Samantha. Welcome, 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 all guys. Thank you again for showing up. So, when it comes to Ifa, though, these are constructive rituals because, again, we're trying to correct imbalance. We're not trying to create imbalance. We're not trying to force anything to come. With Ifa, you're going to open up pathways where it's something stuck, when you can't get the blessings that you need to come through for whatever reason. It could be through somebody else doing some work to you. It could be through your own undoing or things of that nature. So that's what you want to do those types of works for, okay? And it's not much different. No spell really, again, when you're working with things related to your mind, your mental energy, and you're kind of trying to change your mindset, right? So you want to get a more positive mindset. You're going to do meditation. You're going to do affirmations, visualization, things like that. All of those are forms of spell work as well. Again, it's about, are you doing it based on what's for your highest good, for your best interest, or are you doing those things because you want something that is not aligned with your destiny? That's going to be the primary difference here. Okay, I got a number of questions from you all before the episode on IG and elsewhere. And one of the questions is, why do people think that Ifa and black magic are the same, and how can you tell the difference? Which is a very important question. So obviously, we're going to see that confusion coming through here because Ifa, the ritual work can look very, very similar, right? Especially when you're talking about the sacrifices, the offerings, and things like that. They can look really similar. You can feed evil forces the same way. You can feed good and benevolent forces. That's the reality of it. And so outsiders, unfortunately, don't understand that. The European outsiders who first came in and started to call our practices these types of words, they don't understand it. So, even charms that you asked about the day before, right? Obviously in today's world, you can put, like the name. So this is actually Ifa. So you can see Ifa there, right? But historically, a bead is a bead. And you can take this set of beads, which they call Ilekis, right, in the Yoruba language. You can take this set of beads and you can use it for good or nefarious purposes. That's the reality of it, unfortunately. You're saying, I believe that the demonization of Ifa and associating it with witchcraft and black magic is steeped in anti-blackness and colonial mindsets. Absolutely. And we're going to get deeper into that because it is, unfortunately, it was to demonize us, to make us even so not want to practice our own traditions, which is sad because so many black people, you say anything about African spirituality and A lot of them are worse than the white people in today's world. Question over here: what are the ways to combat enemies that have done harm against your family? We're gonna get to that, but definitely that will be through Ifa, some good practices that are going to work against the negative forces that we're going to talk about here. Okay, so Ifa too, it can be used for the same purposes as I said before as these devices. Juju, black magic, witchcraft, people go to those for love, for wealth, for protection, and things like that. The difference is, again, is it by force, or is it according to your destiny alignment? So for instance, especially with something like well, all of it, but I'm going to use love for an example, right? So sometimes people want a specific person they see, and it's like, this is who I want, period, point blank, no matter if that person is married or with somebody else, or just not for them, even if the person may be single. It just may not be meant to be. But it's like, I want this person by any means necessary, so I'm going to do what it takes. And so the person proceeds to do some kind of ritual or spell work, whether they do it on their own or if they go to somebody else to do it in order to compel that person to be with them. That's when we get into the witchcraft, the juju, the black magic aspects of these devices. Whereas with Ifa, you're going to go and first see, is this love aligned? And is it something that I even should be doing, right, to put it together? It's one thing to go and do some type of love work, a crochet or something like that, in order to attract the right person to you. And another thing to do it to force a specific person to be with you. Okay. Ifa, we base everything on divination. We're going to check first, right? Whether it's full on Idafa or whether it is just a spiritual investigation or something like that. We are going to check to see, is this aligned with your path before we move forward to do ritual work. That's what should be done, right? If it's not, then you're kind of outside of the protocols of traditional practice. People, we do not work with evil spirits in Ifa. You are not going to summon an evil force and ask that force to do any work on your behalf, and you're going to actually call that or consider that to be Ifa, traditional Ifa practice, because that's not what it is. That being said, the same devices that somebody knows how to use in Ifa, they can use it for good and bad. But again, you get outside of the traditional element with the practice when you start doing work that is against anything that's about alignment and balance and things like that. Okay, because the Orishas, that's who you work with in Ifa. These are elemental forces that are for our good. They're here to help us to balance and to grow and to move forward in life. Another question: why do people practice black magic? Primarily because they want to control things. They want what they want, right? Or they could do it for manipulative purposes, to harm people, to bring evil upon like their enemy, somebody that they don't like. And it happens quite frequently, unfortunately. Or to get some kind of forbidden access to power or knowledge or something like that. Is there a war between Ifa and black magic is another question in that guy. So there's technically no war as far as Ifa being like just constantly fighting against black magic. Like, that's not the purpose of Ifa. Ifa is there again for balance, for alignment, right? So you're going to use the divination tools to identify if there are issues. And then if there are issues, you will get the prescription on how to deal with those issues. But it's not like you're just, waking up every day and just, wielding, battle against evil through Ifa, because that's not what the system is really about. It can help with that. It does help with that. But my point is, that's like not the overriding purpose. The overriding purpose is for you to fulfill your destiny. And in order to do that, we do sometimes need to remove negative forces out of the way for that to happen. So now let's go into Ifa versus Juju versus Ifa rather. So we're gonna look at the definition of what that means. I got a question real quick. I think you said, can you speak to why there's a stigma between Ifa and other African systems like Palo, especially when a lot of have bloodlines to both? This is a good question. It is very unfortunate that it is even a question or a concern. A lot of that, it comes down to tribalism, in my opinion, right? I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday, even so, because it, to me, it's just another form of tribalism. It's like, well, this is what we do over here, and that's what we do over there. So, you guys are wrong and we're right, and so forth and so on. That same divide and conquer mentality, because a lot of it was derived from the same place. I'm not going to say the exact same place, because there were other traditions in West Africa and even other parts of Africa rather, that traveled to the U.S. and the islands and things like that. So it's not like Ifa or the Yoruba tradition is the only one that is here. And I do get it from that perspective, because there's so much integration going on. That being said, a lot of those traditions, are part of our people group. And some people just feel like, well, you should go with, what your direct ancestors were practicing instead of going back to Ifa, because some people feel like, well, what if your ancestors were opposed to the Yoruba people and now you're practicing something that your ancestral lineage was actually against? And that's a hard sell for me personally, just because we, especially Black people throughout the diaspora, we tend to be mixed with so many different people groups. So it's not easy to say, well, I am only this one thing. And so how do you know if you don't have lineage from the Yoruba people, right? And the DNA test just don't cut it in today's world, because there's so much nuance with that. So nobody truly knows. All I would say is go with where your heart is, right? Is Ifa for everybody? Absolutely not, right? I never encourage everybody to just go into Ifa or any other tradition. But at the same time, nobody should discourage another person from going into Ifa because they feel like, well, this isn't part of your bloodline, or your bloodline could have been against the Yoruba people lineage or what have you. You have to go with what you feel is right. You're saying Ifa goes beyond lineage on IG. Yes, absolutely. It does. It's way beyond just lineage. And what we have to understand too is a lot of times people say Ifa and they just simply equate it to Nigeria and Nigeria alone, not realizing that the Yoruba people, for one, are spread throughout West Africa and even so beyond. But we have, in today's world, the highest known concentration in West Africa. But that is inclusive of Benin, Ghana, Togo, and some other areas over there. It is not just in Nigeria. And so, even so, some of the other tribes that are called by different names are still heavily linked to the Yoruba people groups. So there's just so many dynamics involved in that. I just feel like it's a matter of, geopolitical type of dynamics that we really need to get rid of, truly. You said, thank you for answering the question. I feel the same, but people always tiptoe around the answer. Appreciate you. Love your content. Thank you so much, Dimitri. Yeah. And I get why, because it's like, it's a can of worms that doesn't need to even really be opened up. I'm like, practice what you want to practice. Like, why is it a big deal that you're worried about what other people decide to practice? If you don't feel like Ifa is for you, fine, go and practice what you feel like is for you. But you don't have to step on other people's toes to do that. So going into the definition of Juju. So Juju is considered a West African term for the most part, when we're referring to the charms and the objects and the ritual practices that hold spiritual power, similar to Ifa and other traditions from the region. However, the term Juju has both Hausa roots and also roots from the French language. So they both have their own terminology for Juju that doesn't mean necessarily the same thing. That being said, originally, Juju wasn't considered either good or bad, really. It was just the charms and the spell work and the things like that. And you could use it based on how you saw fit. All right. Now, and it wasn't really associated with also like a specific tradition. It was just the ability to use spells and charms to manifest the things that you desire to manifest in life. Okay. It even so today, this is why you hear people say good juju versus bad juju in a lot of regions. Now, in West Africa, usually when they say juju, they just mean bad. But a lot of times I see in the Americas, people will classify it based on good versus bad because of their understanding or connotation towards the word. But unfortunately, colonization kind of wiped out the notion that you could have something called good juju. So most of the time you're in West Africa, somebody say juju, they're talking about bad or evil words that are being used to manipulate powers or forces. Okay, the concept of juju was also perpetuated during the colonial era rather, as outsiders started to come in and see what people were doing, and they're like, this is horrible, this is evil, or what have you, because they had no true understanding of what was going on. They were on the outside, looking in and kind of basing what they saw on what their people were doing, which we'll get to later on, the witchcraft and the black magic. And somehow that term just kind of turned into something to mean something just completely like bad or evil or wrong. Okay. So, of course, ultimately, this reduced all African traditions to this catch-all phrase, juju, or what have you, which means evil to the average person, instead of it meaning either or it just even so referring to the spell work or the charms and not to an entire tradition or an entire system or lineage practice. You're saying, or they knew it worked and banned it because of its power. That's a huge part of it as well. And thank you for saying that. They absolutely banned it because of its power. But again, in order to turn us against it, they had to demonize it, because they weren't going to just say, oh, don't use it because you can't do that. So they had to make it seem evil or what have you. Same thing with us as a people group. They had to make our skin seem evil, right? Our features and all of those things in order to demonize us so that we would feel inferior about ourselves, because originally Black people didn't feel that way. You could go into, any Black region of the world and nobody was discriminating based on light skin versus dark skin. It wasn't this whole dynamic of colorism that you see right now on the continent today. Even Black people don't like to be Black on the continent because they have demonized everything about us, right? So our skin, our hair, our features, our religions, our cultures, period. Yes, you're saying, or the drum. Absolutely. That was a major part of it too. When we were practicing, even in the Americas, we were using the drum and they removed that. They made it illegal for us to use the drum because they realized that we were using it to work with our spiritual forces, even so summon spirits in some cases. So that's how it goes. I got the question too about whether juju is the same as voodoo. And it is not the same as what is called voodoo in the Western world, or voodoo, which is the term that's most often rather used for it in like Ghana, Benin, and those types of areas. So as I said before, the juju is basically the charms or the spell work. Whereas when you say voodoo, that's a whole spiritual system that came out of those areas of West Africa, and they still call it by voodoo in today's world. Some people just say voodoo, but it's the same thing. Voodoo are derivatives of the Voodoo tradition that we see practiced in the Americas, particularly in Haiti and Louisiana, right? But there are also other voodoo practices in other places of the world, in other parts of the world, and also in other parts of the Western region, what we call the West. However, we don't use that terminology all the time in the same way. Juju, as I said before, those are the broad spiritual practices, the broad objects, the broad rituals and things like that that we utilize for that. And they're not the same, even though unfortunately they are used interchangeably pretty much all the time by outsiders, people who don't know exactly what's going on. They say voodoo, juju. Even so, the word voodoo just means spirit. It doesn't mean anything negative or evil. But if you go by Hollywood depictions, you automatically assume it's something evil because people say whenever they say voodoo, they make it look like it's something scary or evil or bad. And especially the imagery that you see in Hollywood is just crazy. All right. So in today's world, juju charms are considered to be different from Ifa, the Lakey sacred items, as I talked about before. They are not considered to be the exact same thing. Again, most of it is just a connotation of the word juju. They're usually in today's world, when we say juju, we're talking about objects that have been infused with power from nefarious forces itself, not instead of, rather, I don't know what's going on with my speech today, instead of the orishas, okay? Evil objects are consecrated through the processes that are based on our standard protocols. There is a system in place, right? Regulation, even so, in place when it comes to the Ifa tradition. So you're saying here, is there a concept of a grand elbow to where the attempts to change the trajectory of some of the larger world issues like financial, spiritual, violent world issues? That's a really good question. So there is like communal elbow, which is performed, especially like during festivals and things like that, to take care of that particular community and keep it in order. I don't know personally of it being something like that. I don't think it would be, just because Ifa is a communal tradition in order, and that's the way, it kind of started. And so if you're taking care of the smaller collective community, then automatically you're taking care of those larger aspects of the community. I don't know. I wish it were, right? So if it was some kind of huge evil that we could do that would take care of all of the world issues, that would solve a whole lot of issues. But, I don't think that. If it is, obviously it has not worked up until today. So I don't think that, I have to ask. I just don't think it is something like that you could do that would have that level of a global impact, unless maybe you're doing it all the time continuously. I don't know. Are Elekis different from every temple or place you practice? Are there, so to say, universal Elekis to know the authenticity of them? If you're referring to Elekis as far as the beads themselves, because Elekis are beads, right? So the beads you can use even modern day things. These in today's world, you will see a lot of people with the traditional beads, if that's what you mean. But you don't have to use the traditional beads. You can use even some of the modern day beads, if you will. It just needs to be in the color for the associated orisha, for instance. Now, when it comes to the protocols for actually consecrating the Elekis, then yeah, you want to use, there are standard protocols for that process, right? And it could be a tad bit different as far as how they actually carry it out, but there's going to be the protocol of consecrating the item. So you're going to do the animal sacrifice, you're going to do incantations and things like that in order to infuse that element with the essence of the orisha that is being consecrated or blessed for. So I hope that answered your question. All right. So, greetings everyone who is coming in. Greetings, greetings, greetings. Witchcraft versus Ifa. Now let's look at this terminology. So, witchcraft is a European word, right? It originally came from the European practices that they associate with nefarious spell words, different pacts, hidden spiritual power, etc., that was condemned through their church organization. So, later on, unfortunately, again, with the European contact of Africa, they began to basically use this word also to describe nefarious acts amongst the Africans, because what we were doing looked a lot like what their people were doing who were outside of the church organization, and they call that witchcraft. So what do they do when they go into Africa? They call what we were doing witchcraft, without really truly examining what it is that we were doing, why we were doing it, how we were doing it, etc. They just, hey, this is witchcraft, we got to get rid of it. So we're going to do everything that we can to demonize it, etc. But the European witchcraft is completely different than our traditional African systems, as we already know. Goodness, I can't get the words out today. As we already know, there are differences in what they were doing and what we actually do, and it still is, because people still practice what they deem as witchcraft from a European perspective, while we are still practicing our traditions that are not witchcraft in and of themselves. I got a question about Wicca too. So Wicca is a modern day system, right? That was founded on the principles of what you would call paganism, and paganism being anything outside of the church dynamic, right? So it was based on still the principles of very similar to what we do in African traditions. So it's based on European folklore, ceremonial magic, nature worship, and things like that, right? Which is very, very similar to the things that we do. Not the exact same thing, though. They did take, obviously, a lot of what they do in what we call Wicca today from our traditions, but has their own unique spin to it at the end of the day. But Wicca does not present itself as working with nefarious or destructive forces. Again, very akin to what we do. They're just venerating nature, working with the elemental forces and things like that. Okay, it's built on ethical codes or ethical principles. So I do know a lot of people who actually start in Wicca and then they come to African spirituality, or they work with the system side by side, which is okay if you're working with Wiccan practices that are founded on principles of not doing harm to other people, right? And understanding that there's reciprocity in everything that you do, because that's what Ifa in African traditions are based on. We're not doing harm. We're understanding that there are repercussions for every single thing that we do. So we do it in order, and we do it from a perspective that we're trying to bring harmony to our environment and to ourselves. Hidden Beauty, you're saying, thanks for letting us know the difference between European witchcraft to African witchcraft. I noticed that there isn't the same stigma across with Wicca as it is with Ifa. Hey, very good point. Absolutely. It's not. And I don't want it to be a stigma with either one, but unfortunately, all of our practices, even when you look at like the ancestor veneration from other cultures and traditions, like the Chinese and the Indians or what have you, they just don't carry the same stigma as ours do. And I think that has a lot to do with it because we stigmatize it ourselves, right? So in the Black community, you see other Black people condemning and criticizing African traditional practices, whereas, within the larger Asian communities who practice their traditions, of course, they're not ostracizing them. Other people do, but they're careful to step on toes because they know that they will get backlash. Same thing with Wicca. The people who practice Wicca, they're still a pretty large subset, and they are Europeans. So it's like yeah, they're looked at negatively, but they just don't get that same, like outright stigma as we do when we try to practice our tradition. Even so, you got other people going in. I mean, I talked about this before. You think about a Chinese restaurant or something, somebody will walk in and just, rub Buddha's stomach like it's nothing, right? But if you were to have an African restaurant with a big, icon or something like that from one of our traditions, people will be calling it all kind of blasphemy and just, going crazy all over the place. You couldn't even have that because the restaurant wouldn't survive because people would take it as something negative or evil or, they doing this and they doing that in their particular space instead of giving us that same space, right? You're saying Wicca is white people's stuff. It is. It is. We are not Wiccans. I am not claiming Wicca. I'm not telling anybody to join Wicca. I agree with you on that. That being said, some Black people oftentimes go that route before they come fully into African spirituality, and sometimes they practice it side by side. And even so, what I tell people, because I've dealt with coaching clients who've like felt ostracized when they chose to practice Wicca, and they're like, people saying, well, why would you go into that and not go into your ancestral lineage? Well, we do have to understand, especially about us who are, in the diaspora, there's a lot of mixing and matching, right? So they could have European ancestry that's trying to take them back to that side of Wicca. So I don't condemn anybody for what they choose to practice if it's not evil, right? If it's evil, I'm not dealing with you. I'm not condemning you. You do what you want to do, but I'm not dealing with any of that. But that being said, I do understand people who choose to practice Wicca for that reason, because we don't know what's in people's bloodline. Even somebody who is completely white presenting, they have sometimes Black lineage. Oftentimes they have like visible Black heritage. And some of them even want to go and work with the African traditions, and they're being ostracized because of the way they present. But they may have some African ancestors who are pushing them to go back into the traditional way, but they face that same type of backlash or what have you. So yeah. I'm not gonna say which spirits are superior just because we're dealing with elemental forces at the end of the day. So most of the time it's just a matter of what name you're calling it, right? So you're talking about Oshun, for instance, goddess of water, fresh waters. So there are goddesses of fresh water in every tradition, right? There are gods of fire. There are gods of, purity, gods and goddesses of chaos and change. Talk about, Shiva. That's that same Oya energy, so forth and so on. So I tend to see them as really we're dealing with the same elemental forces. We just call them by different names, and we venerate them according to our culture and what our ancestors were taught, how they were taught to work with those specific deities or entities, whatever you want to classify them as. And other people have that same notion in their tradition. But going back to the conversation, most Wiccans see their craft as pretty much healing, protective, nature oriented in the same way that we do. They don't consider themselves to be harmful. Though some Wiccans do call themselves witches, right? And they sometimes do practice witchcraft. Same way with somebody practicing Ifa. Some people say they practice Ifa, been initiated in all those types of things, but they still delve into witchcraft, unfortunately. So, you can have the same thing on either plate. Ifa, though, as a whole, this is an ancient African knowledge system with its own defined cosmology, priesthood, ritual order, things like that, very akin to other African spiritual systems. As we said before, colonialism came in and knocked out a lot of our things and changed up the dynamic. So now it's been mislabeled as witchcraft. People will say you're dealing with witchcraft or what have you if they don't full on understand what it is, which is most of the time they don't. All right. You had European missionaries, colonizers. They saw our sacrifice. They saw us doing ancestor veneration. They saw us doing Ebo and taking a crochet and putting together things and so forth and so on. They saw all of this from that Christian worldview of monotheism. And I put that in quotes because they don't truly practice monotheism themselves with the concept of the Trinity, right? 3 in 1 Godhead. It's really the same thing that we're saying, even though we have many more deities and we say that they are innumerable, well more than 3, but it's the same notion. When you're saying you got 3 gods in 1, you're just saying that these are different aspects or manifestations of the same God. And that's ultimately what the Orishas are. They are different manifestations of the, supreme creator, the supreme being, right? Olodumare. So, yes, you say you finally call it live. Yes, thank you for joining us, Lance. Appreciate you as always. You are asking Jeremiah, what's the difference between hoodoo and Ifa? So, good question. Hoodoo is African American folk magic, if you will. So, hoodoo has a lot of roots in the Bible in Christianity because of where it was born. Definitely, it has crossover with Ifa because it also has those roots back to our African traditions. But in most instances, and it's very familiarly based because people couldn't just come together and easily practice hoodoo in a group and do all these types of festivals and things like that because of the slavery period. So what they end up doing it, that's why they call it folk magic a lot of times, because it was very heavily either familiar or even so individualized, and it leans heavily on the Bible, and just the church in general, right? But there are a lot of roots from Ifa, but there are also a lot of roots from the Congo region when it comes to hoodoo practice. So many different dynamics infused in it. Hoodoo is basically our form of voodoo in the deep south, right? You're saying the Bible is extremely geared towards programming. I would say people's interpretation of the Bible is geared towards programming. Because if you just read the Bible as a book, you can gain a whole lot of wisdom from it. It's when you try to indoctrinate people with it. And that's what the church does. That's what they are for, is to indoctrinate people and tell them that these events happen and this is why these events happen, and then try to completely fool you because the Bible says specific things in it, but they're telling you that it says something different, right? And then you got 2 different versions, the Old and the New Testament. But then in the Old Testament, it says, I'm God and I change it not. But then the New Testament is a complete change from what was going on in the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, a lot of that actually came from the records of our ancestors, because it was over there in the Middle East, it's land full of Black people. But even so, those writings and those strips came out of just things that our ancestors were talking about and they believed in. It was pretty much like them digging up people's journals, right? Where they had been talking about different things that they did and their family traditions. It was some history in there and so forth and so on. And then they went in and broke it down to what they wanted to be in there. Because if you go and get into the Apocrypha, for instance, there are a whole lot of books that were taken out of the Bible that have rituals in there similar to what we do in the Ifa tradition. Even so, the whole book of Leviticus is about sacrifices and stuff, and it almost reads like a strip from what to do in Ifa, like the sacrifice. What do you do when this happens? You give this particular type of animal, and they broke it down to who is doing what, why it's done. What do you do when you have this type of problem, when you want to atone for this sin, and so forth and so on? Like the whole book of Leviticus is about sacrifices and offerings. So I do get it. I know why, because there's been a lot of indoctrination, but if people would really sit down and read it and understand it for themselves instead of going through what other people are saying, it would be a whole different scenario. You said nothing geared towards personal development. You saying, oh, you saying not just reading it just shows tons of general rules, nothing geared toward personal development. It actually is though. There's a lot in the Bible. I don't read it anymore. I've read the Bible through and through, and I've read the Bible in different languages even. So I had an interlinear years ago. A lot of what you read in the Bible in English is actually not what it says. But even if you read it in English and you read it for what it says, it's really an astrotheological book. And there's a lot of wisdom in it, like the Psalms, the Proverbs. They can be greatly helpful and inspirational in your life. It's about the way you use it and the way you understand it. If you're reading it from the context of somebody else's interpretation who is trying to indoctrinate you, absolutely, it's a bunch of do's and don'ts. But if you read it and you understand the original context of it and what the original people group were really saying, it's a completely different meaning to it. But I digress. Let me get back to this topic at hand, but it's a good side conversation. Ultimately, our traditions were just branded as evil, so they could be suppressed, so that we could be suppressed and we could be made to feel inferior. Now we're going to take a quick look at black magic versus Ifa. So black magic, right? This is also a European term that came about during the medieval period, basically to describe practices that were dark in nature, forbidden, outside of the church's authorities. Just another word for the same thing at the end of the day. It was often applied to those people who were accused of heresy, sorcery, dealings with spiritism, things like that were not accepted through the church. Okay, you're saying maybe it's coded beyond my comprehension. You're talking about the Bible. So yeah, the original Bible is not what you read in English, right? You have to understand like where it actually came from, the historical context. And that the words that you're reading in English is the translation isn't what it is. You have to really dig deep into it. I got to that point because I was confused as heck during my journey, and I was frustrated. And I was like, I got to understand something because this is not making sense to me. And so, before I completely put it down, I went on this really deep excursion that led me down a rabbit hole that I don't even want to get into at this particular moment. But yeah, it went so deep. Let's see, we're going back to it. You're welcome. You're welcome. He said, what was I saying? It was later projected onto non-European traditions during those colonial encounters again. So now they're practicing witchcraft, they're practicing black magic, juju, and whatever other term that they want to use to downgrade. They got so many terms that helps them feel better about, making us inferior. So Ifa, we don't recognize those harmful practices as being part of traditional protocol, as being legitimate or viable for what we want to achieve. That's at the end of the day, as I've said many times. I know I keep saying it, but I have to keep saying it because, this is the reality that we live in. We have to keep saying our traditions are not evil for people to even hear us. You got to say it like 100 million times for a person to hear it just one time, right? So our practice are about balance, as I said. Ifa holds practitioners accountable for those types of actions that you want to do, anything negative in order to cause problems or harm or ill will, right? We operate on the tenets of evil pele. That's gentle character, good behavior, if you will, right? Destiny alignment, all of those different things. Absolutely. Samantha, you're asking, is there a difference between black magic and white magic? According to the people that use those terms, yes. I don't like them. because again, it pits the black-white dynamic against each other. So black magic is supposed to be the dark and evil forces. The white magic is supposed to be, you bringing about good. You're not harming people when you are engaged in those types of practices. To me, that's just another way to infuse racism into the whole dynamic because, why would you call you're going to use the word black that you call us? We're not really black people, but okay, the majority of people have accepted that term to refer to people specifically in America as like African American people with darker skin as black and white. Even though the people that we call white are not truly white, still the connotation, the association is with them. And for you to divide up black and white magic, that's just a whole nother play on racism. Long story short, right? Let's see. Black magic, those types of devices, they're just not practiced from a communal perspective where we're trying to hold people accountable and ensure that we are working toward our own good as a community, as an environment, and so forth. You're saying Feng Shui tells us that black and white should be in harmony at all times, right? It's a dynamic of balance, black and white. I'm just coming from the perspective of, the way those terms are utilized in our society. Black means bad, white means good, right? But you're right. When you're looking at Feng Shui, that's about, balance, the dynamics of balance. The two extremes of color spectrum is not race, but that's what they have made it out to be. You are very welcome, Samantha. Thank you for the question. Core signs. I'm not going to get too deep into this because I did go into the signs of somebody attacking you, witchcraft, those types of things in a different live stream on the protection of culture. I'll try to link it here in this episode in the notes on YouTube when we finish. But I'm going to just go over some overriding signs that you may be dealing with, like somebody doing witchcraft, magic, things like that against you. And I'll get to how to resolve those issues after that. So obviously, if you're experiencing sudden misfortunes, repeated bad luck, setbacks, things like that, no clear cause, that could be a sign that somebody's using these devices against you. Unexplained illnesses that resist any type of normal treatment measures, recurring nightmares, disturbing dreams. That's a huge sign. If you keep having really, really bad nightmares and things like that, being attacked, being bound. All right. Strained relationships or sudden conflict that comes out of nowhere, those types of things. Persistent feelings of just fear, heaviness, blockages. You just are dealing with so much stuff and you don't know where it's coming from and it doesn't make any sense or where it's coming from. You're asking Dimitri, would you consider Ifa magical? It shares so many aspects related to what's considered magical and is all encompasses, but some say it's not. Thoughts? Okay, so I wouldn't say magical just because what we were doing back in the day, our ancestors, they wouldn't have called it magical. It was just part of everyday life for them. We see it as magical because we don't see it happening every day like we used to when our ancestors were working with our traditions the way they used to. And magical, to me, that word implies something, like just so out of the ordinary, so different, so kind of once in a lifetime type of thing. Whereas the things that we were manifesting, is if you want to use that word for it in today's time, that's what I would consider it more. We were just manifesting. We were at the height of our manifestation mode. And we were able to accomplish so much because we were operating in alignment. But when you see, you will see people flying and things like that, and it was nothing to them. It was just part of everyday life, I lived in Africa. Some of the stories, I first started to hear when I lived there, to me it was fantastical. And it was like everyday, ordinary stuff to the people there. And then, I'm like, what? Me and my family, is this serious? But they would, it was just like an everyday thing. It wasn't a big deal to them just because they're seeing this all the time. You're saying all encompassing. I don't know what you mean by that part, but if I answered your question, you could let me know. If you want to explain that part about it all encompassing, I'm not sure what that means. You're right. I mean, we are magic if you want to use that word for. Again, that's a European word because wasn't using that word. We was just doing our thing. We was just practicing our spiritual systems, and it was just a part of everyday life that things would manifest. And it's only considered that in today's world because we don't see it as often as we used to. You're saying, can you help us understand the Yoruba concept of the zodiac? Mayans, Kim shared the 13-month moon cycle calendar. So I would have to look at that in a whole nother episode because it's not something that I have even laid out today, and it would take us severely off course to talk about that. But I will put it in my notes to try to get a live stream about that. Okay. Let's see. Go back to it. Let's see. So those are just some of the signs. Like I said before, guys, check out the episode on the protection of crochet, and you'll get more signs about like if somebody is doing something against you. So now we're going to talk about, transformation, restoration. If somebody is attacking you, what do you do? So I was asked this question: does Ifa physically fight with black magic? So we're talking about these dynamics. Most of the time, they're always implemented in the spiritual realm. They may have physical consequences for sure, but because they originate in the spiritual, Ifa is going to fight them in the spiritual as well. So we're going to work with the Orishas to go and battle on our behalf against these evil forces so that they will fight them. And then whatever works that manifested from them, whether they be purely in the spiritual realm, right, like psychic attacks and things like that, or if they manifest in the physical, like through health problems, illnesses, financial problems, relationship problems, etc. Once you fight those dynamics in the spiritual realm, they will back off, and then you'll see restoration in that area of your life. How does Ifa protect you from witchcraft or black magic? This is the question of the hour, right? So Ifa protects us in so many different ways. You'll get the reading, you'll know what you need to do. So it'll be able, most likely, if you're fighting against something really, really serious, you might need to take some crochet or work with the crochet, even if it's not like consuming it. Orisha connection, so that could be through the Lakis or getting pots or icons and things like that. Taboo guidance. You might be violating taboos that leave you open and suspect to these types of attacks. So you want to know about that, and it might come up. You need to stop doing certain things that you're doing that's opening up the gateway for you to experience attacks. Does Ifa perform exorcisms was another question that I received. So not in the same way that you think about it from a Western lens, right? It's not going to be, somebody coming in and just laying hands on somebody and they head spinning around and vomiting up green stuff, right? Not that type of exorcism. Instead, it would be through the spiritual work that I just mentioned, whereby those forces are going to go and fight on your behalf. And so it could absolutely call a spirit out of a person if they are full on possessed by some kind of force. But it's not like what you think about in the movies, if that's what the question was asking. All right. Yeah, I said that part. So how can you prevent witchcraft attacks? All right, there was another question that I got. You can stop those attacks in many different ways. All right. You can't stop people from attacking you. That means that you cannot stop them from attacking you. However, you can prevent their attacks from being successful against you by different things, right? So you want to connect with your Orishas. You want to keep that connection tight. And there are so many different ways. You can have the pot, the icons. You don't have to. You can wear the leggings. You can also continuously feed your Orishas so that they're always working on your behalf, things like that, so that you can prevent or avert the repercussions of any type of attacks that may be thrown your way. You can also keep your body clean, spiritual baths, using spiritual soaps, using other devices in your home, the charms, the ID, the Isara, so many other devices that can be used to protect you. Okay. Obviously, as I always say, walking in Iwa Pele, this is probably going to be one of your best guards, right? The more you walk in gentle character, the less of a door you leave open for spiritual attacks to come in and take place in your life. That doesn't mean that it's foolproof, though, like just because you're walking in Iwa Pele, which nobody does 100%. But even if you're doing your best and you're at a really, really high level of walking in Iwa Pele, there are some people who are really strong in these dynamics and they can penetrate you. That's the reality of it. So again, that's why we stick close to our spirits and we are constantly feeding them, working with them, and using protective devices to keep us from being subjected to these types of attacks. You're asking what way is it evil? Is what evil? I'm not sure what you mean by that. And guys, yes, if you have any more questions, let me know because I'm almost finished. I forgot to say that earlier in this section. You can also prevent spiritual attacks by not engaging in these devices yourself. If you decide you want to go and work with these devices, please understand that you're opening yourself up to them as well. Right? So if you go and you work with any type of practices that are meant to harm other people, that are meant to control other people and things like that, you yourself will be open and susceptible to these types of attacks yourself. What are you saying? Is evil? Evil is evil? No, Ifa is not evil at all. Like this is what we've been talking about. Ifa is about balance. It's about alignment. It is not about doing nefarious things or forcing outcomes. It is about opening up passageways so that you can get the outcomes that you need, that you desire in your life to fulfill your destiny. With that being said, if anybody is interested, if you're interested in walking the path of your destiny or addressing any challenges that you may be facing related to any of the things that we discussed today and beyond, visit us at Asanee 44. We have Ifa readings and so many other things related to the tradition. We are a full service Ifa temple, so reach out if you have questions. DM me IG at Asanee 44, or you can email me support@asanee44.com. Right. So the next live stream I want to do, because you guys have been asking about this, how do you know when an Orisha is calling you, and obviously what to do about it when they are. So this is all I have for you guys. I hope I was able to answer all of your questions and get all the feedback that you wanted out. If you don't have any questions, I don't see any more on either platform, I'm going to go ahead and bid you all farewell. So as always, Ashe, have a very blessed and beautiful day and beyond, guys.